good. Thank you. Someone else?
Our biggest problem
Mm.
is 72% of all people in the chapter are Spanish.
Mm.
And we have a Spanish Assembly of God church that meets around the building. Now have more than we do
Mm.
because of the language barrier.
Mm.
And and also this generation attends the church once a week. And so we'll have a good crowd on Sunday morning, tomorrow night, maybe 25.
Mm.
And Wednesday night, maybe 30 to get the kids down there, maybe 40. But they weren't trained. The parents who didn't train them, or whatever the case was, and church is important. Church usually falls down about the fourth and fifth. And it makes them proud.
Mm. Mm. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Our biggest thing right now in Southern California is, with the pandemic, is 40% of our, not just our church, but all the churches, people have not come back. And we're just now, they're coming out and giving Jesus out an outreach. Love Land Park Saturday, we're going to be doing some other things. We're trying to locate and bring them back in. It's been a really difficult time. They say they're watching on Facebook or they're watching, but then you look at the stats, the average time is about 4.5 to 6 minutes they watch service. So they're not getting church. And their calendars get so full with social activities that they're busy, but they're forgetting Matthew 6:33, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. They're putting all this other stuff in. And that's happened because our government did that to us. And they did it for a reason. I mean, you can get political or however you want, but I believe, and then when people come to our church, they say, well, this is a whole new church, because we did not shut down. We kept our 2 weeks and we opened back up. We had, the drive-in church, we had the people in the grass, we had the people inside, we had the Facebook, YouTube, all that good stuff. And so now is to get back in the community and do the outreaches. And because the communities are open back up, they're doing the concerts in the park this year, they didn't do last year. And so we're going to be out in the community giving away water and pizza and stuff every Wednesday night. So being in our church, in that building, the governor already kicked us out at one time. We're going to go with the city now that they do these concerts and open up their, say, this is our church. And we're going to have a booth there and all that good stuff. So trying to reconnect and say, hey, come see us. Our kids love going tonight. Celebrate recovery Monday night. So we got to get back where they're at. And like you said, they need to be seen and they need to know these are the homeless people. We feed them Mondays and Wednesdays. They show up, they know they get a meal. And Sunday mornings we always have food. So we got to give them a voice and let them know they are people, they are human, and we do care. I used to tell people there's 4 things or 3 things I used to argue. And I wouldn't argue tongues. People have been arguing that issue a lot longer than I've ever been around. A lot smarter guys I've ever been. I won't argue eschatology. That's been an argument with brilliant men that still can't read and write. I won't argue salvation when saved, always saved, or losing salvation. I don't have the time for it. Now I have to I won't argue about flat earthers either. So that's where we're at. So, but what we need to do is when that young lady or that man is there hurting, we need to be the hand and feet of Jesus and love on them right there. It's not our job to fix them. Our job is to love them and point them to a Jesus that can change their life. If we're doing that, we'll reach this world, we'll reach our communities.
Thank you for sharing. So, were you going to?
I was thinking of myself. I guess the best way to do that is for all of us, the body of Christ, is to get together and to go out public as a group and just start confessing and praising God and walk around talking about the Lord and impressing and just inspiring people and seeing joy of our life through Christ and inspiring them. And then, that inspiration, excitement, is spreads. Like, and that would be, we just need to come together and start doing it as a group, as a body. And the more we do it, the stronger we'll be. And I say, what's going on with people? What's happening? What's going on? And that's it. Separate yourself from the world and then bring yourself to Christ. And that's a very strong, powerful message right there.
It is, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
In our community, I think it's more about the knowledge that people don't know. People don't know what's out there. The fathers, one of the first things I learned when I became a Free Will Baptist was how important it was
Thank you. These are great ideas. One of the ways that we share in Japan, one of the ways that we are trying to combat the suicide rate, the spirit of hopelessness that we're seeing in Japan, is our church has we are right by the train tracks. And so on the side of our building, outside of our windows, we've put a huge QR code on the side of the building and on the front of the building. And when people pull up their phone, they turn on their camera, and they aim it at that QR code, it takes them directly to a web page that has testimonies of Japanese people who have met Jesus, so that they can hear personal accounts of how Jesus has changed their lives, how he has brought them from hopelessness. There's one story of a woman who constantly, she said every time she walked to the train station and she was going to ride the train, she would look at those tracks and she would think about what it would be like to throw her life away. She was just constantly battling this. And then she met Jesus. And the video that I wish I could share with you is just a simple video. It's the first one that we have on this webpage. And it's telling people, you are loved. You are seen by God. One of the first women that I had the privilege of leading to Jesus when we were in Japan, she looked at me not long afterwards and she said, Ashley, I think the number one thing Japanese people need to hear is that they're loved. Because so many times we're just seen as a number, we're not seen as individuals, and we need to hear that we're loved. And this video says that. You are created for purpose. You are loved. You are beloved. You are priceless. You are made by a creator. And it's a beautiful video of Japanese people sharing that. And so that's one of the ways that our church, Hope Alive, is trying to reach out into our community and share hope. And one of the testimonies on there is of the first woman baptized at our church. Her name is Rihoko. I usually talk about her sister, but I want to share Rihoko's story today. Rihoko is a phenomenal pianist. She is an amazing pianist. She can play any piece of music that's set in front of her, classical, whatever. I piddle a little bit, but I'm nothing like Rihoko. And Rihoko had been so damaged by words throughout the course of her life. Words that were spoken to her when she was young, and she internalized those, and she struggles with depression, debilitating depression. She had a scholarship to attend one of the most elite music schools in Tokyo, but because of her depression, she could not do it. She couldn't function. And then she met people from Hope Alive, and she met some of our staff from our church. And people who spoke words of life from Scripture to her, who shared the hope that we have in Jesus. And as she shared her testimony in her video, she said, I lived in hopelessness, and I felt so dark and alone and friendless. And then I saw the body of Christ, and I heard words that Jesus spoke that gave me life. And I didn't have this feeling of, quote, hopelessness anymore. And so Rihoko has been a faithful member of our church, serving in a variety of ways. She's growing in her faith. And so we praise the Lord for his work in what he's doing.
All right, so the next, I think there's another slide in just a moment that talks about sharing a message of compassion. Hopefully it'll come up here in a moment, but you understand the idea. So I want to ask you, and I want you to just kind of like popcorn answers, shout them out. Who in your community needs compassion? Now we talked about, maybe this ties in really well with what Ashley talked about, but I want you to just think, who are the people who need compassion in your community? The lost, yeah.
I think the youth, especially here in our immediate area,
Sure.
like the like 11, 12, 13, that area especially.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That's good. That's not good, but that's a good answer. That's what I meant to say. Someone else was going to share back there. Special needs, yeah. Yeah. Man, I think that's That's one of the things that's interesting when we moved to Japan. Ashley and I had been there on a short-term trip before, and I didn't remember seeing anybody with special needs. But maybe it was because of where we're living and the particular path. And we did find out later there is a special needs facility that's in between our home and the church. But we just started seeing lots of people with special needs in Japan. We had missed them the first time, kind of like Brother Kent was saying. We just somehow we didn't see it before, but we started seeing those. Yeah, and there are those in every community, really. So I want to talk a little bit about. I want you to be thinking some about how you can. Well, first of all, how do you know that people need compassion? What are the ways that you find out who needs help in some particular area, or who needs to, a demonstration of love in some way? Talk to them. Yeah, that's a pretty good starting point, right? Yeah, and this has been touched on a little bit, but just like getting outside the doors of the church too, right? We can't just wait there and expect them to come knocking. Some people will, and I think in the past that was more common here in the States, where people knew I can go to the church for help. But increasingly, we're going to have to go and meet them, find them, and to even know what the needs are. I'm going to talk in a little bit about something specific, but I want to. This doesn't seem very high on the list, maybe, but one of the felt needs that people have in the community in which we work in Tokyo is English. Lots of people, they've maybe studied some English, but I don't know if you realize this, but there are millions of people around the world who want to speak English. And there are probably quite a few in your community here who want to learn English or want to improve their English. And so that's something that we see as that's a felt need that people sometimes come to us. It's one of the few things actually that Japanese people approach us about. Japan is wealthy and powerful and modern. So there are somebody asked us a few nights ago when we were sharing at a church, are there ways that you can give something back to Japan besides sharing the gospel? And we said, yes, but it's very difficult because they don't need much. They have all of their physical needs met. It's very difficult to find those things. But ultimately, we know that there are deeper spiritual needs. One of my favorite stories, and I actually spoke about it when we were here at Bakersfield the last time, is in Luke 5. It actually shows up in 3 of the 4 Gospels, but the one I am more familiar with is in Luke 5, where the paralytic, the guy, is brought by his 4 friends, and they tear a hole in the roof and drop him down to Jesus. And he came with a felt need. There was something very obvious to him and his 4 friends, at least 4 friends. They could obviously see there was a need. But when he got to Jesus, Jesus knew, that's a big problem, but there's something actually even deeper than that. But Jesus actually, he met both of those. Even though he healed him, and ultimately that guy died later. I don't know what he died of. I don't know how long he lived, but eventually he died. Jesus met the physical need, but he took care of the deeper spiritual need. And he had compassion. In fact, I was looking this up just in thinking about this. Over and over and over in the New Testament, the person that you see, when you see the word compassion in the New Testament, it's most commonly associated with Jesus. He had compassion on them. Because he had compassion on them, he healed them. He looked and saw the multitudes. He had compassion on them. And so that's the attitude and the heart that we should have. All right, let me tell you a little bit about Japan. Japan is a collectivist society. I think I don't know if there's another word I'm looking for, but I can't think of it. In other words, instead of us, in America, we're very individualistic. In fact, this showed up in the pandemic, right? When people started saying, you got to wear a mask, or you got to get vaccinated, or you got to close the church doors. We all, like that, as Americans, that riles us, and we're like, you can't tell me what to do. And so then we saw people starting to face off and say, well, I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to do this. In Japan, it's very different. There's an ancient Japanese proverb that says the nail that sticks up gets hammered flat. Everyone's expected to just kind of blend in, get along with everybody. In fact, I'm sorry the video didn't work, but that video earlier about people getting on the train, one of the things that if you saw the video or if you experienced this, people are getting crammed in. I mean, it's hard to explain unless you have experienced this or seen it. I mean, you're just being pushed and shoved in, and nobody's complaining. Not a single person. Can you imagine what would happen if we all decided to get on the bus today, and the bus holds 45 people, and 80 people want to ride the bus, and somebody starts shoving us in? How's that going to work in California? It's not going to go so well. But in Japan, everybody's silent. They're gonna give up their rights, their space, for the greater good of the whole community. Now, that's a beautiful thing sometimes, but it can also be a troubling thing, right? When people go along with the wrong thing. So here's one of the things that we've, and Ashley alluded to this earlier, and actually Brother Ken brought this up earlier, others said things along this line, just noticing people. In Japan, no, you don't go up. That one of the things our kids have commented on since we've been back in the States, they'll often say, Americans are so nice. And we're like, sometimes they are. But what they mean is you go to the grocery store, and the person who's checking you out says something like, how are you today? Not always. You guys know that's not always true. But people talk to each other. People greet you, ask you how they're doing. They may not really care, but at least they're going to say that often, especially in the South. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't happen as much here. But in Japan, you don't talk to the person behind the counter. Unless there's a need, unless there's something you need to ask. It's more like they're just there to provide a service. But one of the things Ashley is really good about is she makes a point of intentionally looking at the person in the eyes and talking to them, asking them how they're doing. And often the response she gets is something kind of like this, because that's the last thing they're expecting. We had a conversation with a Japanese pastor and his wife before we went to Japan, and the pastor's wife told Ashley asked her for some advice, and she said, because you're American, you can get away with this. Talk to everybody. Just talk to everybody. She, as a Japanese woman, felt like, I can't do that. I can't just talk to anybody on the street. That's not appropriate. But for Americans, they know we're going to be loud, and we can get away with it. But it's a way to show that we notice people. You're not just a number. You're a person. You're a person created in God's image, and we care about you. And so that's just a really small way that I've seen Ashley do this often. Japan is a graceless culture sometimes. What I don't mean, like, people are very graceful. If you ever watch a tea ceremony or you see some martial arts, you'll see physical grace. But in terms of interacting with one another, there's very little grace. I learned this the hard way the first time I got a ticket in Japan. I turned at a place you're not supposed to turn. And in the States, it's not too uncommon, at least it wasn't a few years ago, to get a warning, right? It's the first time I'm sorry, I didn't know, I didn't see the sign. We get a warning. That's not going to happen in Japan. There are consequences, immediate consequences, and it's expected. People are expected to follow the rules. They largely do. They're expected to live up to expectations. They're expected to perform their duties with near perfection. You know, one of the things that's amazing about Japan is whatever they do well. They work hard. They're diligent and intentional about it. And we love going to McDonald's. We prefer going to McDonald's in Japan to America, because even at McDonald's, you're going to get great service. You're going to get exactly what you ordered. The first time, years ago when I was on a short-term trip, I went with Donnie McDonald, a longtime missionary in Japan, to pick up some pizzas. And he went to the pizza place. It was like Domino's or something. By the way, pizza's really expensive in Japan. But we got the pizzas, and instead of just sliding the pizzas across the counter, the person behind, the clerk, came around the counter, handed us the pizzas. Now, how many restaurants do you get service like that in the States? And it's sure not a Domino's. But But with all of those things, when people do make mistakes, there's very little grace. The next picture here is something, this was in the news just a few weeks ago in a Japanese news source that I look at. It may come up here in a minute. Thanks, Brother Bob. He's doing his best up there, and the technology isn't cooperating. There was a boat accident in the north of Japan just about a month ago. It wasn't huge, but there were some people who lost their lives, and the boat was destroyed. This was the leader of that company, the CEO of that company. This is how you demonstrate that you feel bad or that you made a mistake. I mean, it's complete, and utter humiliation. And often, not always, but sometimes this will be followed by a man like this taking his own life. Last year, 2 years ago, when the Olympics were supposed to come to Japan, and there was all this turmoil. In Japan, there was lots of pressure because if the Olympics don't come, we're going to lose a lot of money. They've spent a lot of money building all of these facilities, and we're not allowing these to come. But there's international pressure to have the Olympics. And so the chief financial officer for the Olympic Committee took his own life. It probably didn't make news here, but it made big news in Japan. And so there's just very, very little grace. And so for some of these reasons and lots of others, people sometimes are just really unhappy. And they're just silently struggling along. When my mother-in-law came to visit us in Japan, but both my in-laws a couple of years ago, my mother-in-law had a great observation. We'd taken them around sightseeing. They'd seen all of these, great places in Tokyo. And then they came to church with us. And she said, the first time I saw Japanese people smile was at Hope Alive. In all of her time visiting, sightseeing around Tokyo, the first time she saw Japanese people smile was at Hope Alive. And of course, the ultimate reason for that is because of Christ. Because these are people who do have hope. These are people who have the Holy Spirit working and living in them. But I want to challenge you to think about this as a church, as Christians here in the States. Do you think about, do you pray about, do you emphasize the atmosphere that people experience when they walk into your church? Do people come in and they feel that? I had a coworker years ago in the States who had grown up in a Muslim home but had become a Christian. And I asked her one time about what was it that led you to Christ. Someone invited her to church, and she said as soon as she walked in, she just felt something is different. Now, ultimately, that's the Holy Spirit, right? We can't manufacture that. But are we prayerful about that? Are we intentional about that? When people come in the doors, we want them to feel loved, no matter what they look like, no matter what kind of background they're from. I want to encourage you again, just create opportunities to meet your community. Get to know them so that you can hear what those needs are. You can find out what people are struggling with. And then let them know that you're nice people, that you're not that weird. We had actually invited a lady to our church, and she came in and she kept saying over and over, there's so many Japanese people here. There's so many Japanese people here. She thought, because it's a church, it's Western. It's not Japanese. It's a bunch of foreigners. And she came in and was shocked at all these Japanese people. Man, would people be shocked when they come in and find, man, these people are nice. These people, they care about me. So I just want to share just a few mini stories of compassion, of some things that we have been a part of at Hope Alive, ways to do this, and maybe just, jog your imagination about some ways that you in your church, your community, can demonstrate compassion. We passed out some essential bags during COVID. Masks were hard to come by in Japan. I don't know if that was the case here. Toilet paper. I don't even know why. I can't figure that out. The toilet paper was flying off the shelves. So we were able to get some and put them in a bag and pass these things around. Sometimes we'd have things like block parties just to meet people and hand out food, hand out water to people. By the way, we discovered that it's difficult to give charity to people. There are not a lot of homeless people in Japan, but there are some. And we found some in our community, and we took some water bottles on a hot summer day. It's hot and humid there in the summer, and tried to offer them, and we were rejected. Because, again, there's no concept of grace. If you give me something, I'm going to owe you something back. I didn't earn that, so I'm not gonna take that. But we had discussions with our local government agency about the possibility of becoming a source or a location for a food bank. That hasn't happened yet, but that's been initiated, those conversations. Praying for people and praying specifically for the needs that they share with you. And of course, listening to what they share. I was really challenged last year at our national association. John Weaver, who was a missionary in Afghanistan for a number of years, he talked about the fact that I've been challenged for months about this. When you go to a restaurant and you know you're about to pray over your meal, ask that waiter or waitress if there's anything you can pray for them about, and then do it. And pray, confidently, expectantly, asking that God will work. We saw God answer prayers in our church community about jobs. We saw a father and son within the same family, have jobs provided. Other things. The wife in that family said, we're just holding on to Jesus' robe. She had been in church enough, had heard stories, had heard about people coming up to Jesus and just grabbing the hem of his robe. We have a lot of people with depression, and walking alongside of them, finding ways to encourage them, spend time with them. Those that are having marital struggles, our church offered to pay for professional counseling for some that were struggling, some marriages that were struggling. For an individual in our church who has some mental health issues, needed some testing, and needed some counseling, we provided payment for that so that he would be able to do that. Trying to meet that need, demonstrate compassion. We provided an onboarding event for other foreigners from other places. It was initially designed because we had a friend who was from Africa. He had a lot of African friends who needed help with things like paperwork, documents that they couldn't read. Actually, one of the guys that ended up coming was from India, and he ended up coming to our church for a substantial time after that, and later asked for help on his visa application, things like that. Showing grace to some young believers who had moral failings, and not saying, that's it, you're done, but coming alongside them. I love the story about, even though it was negative that Paul and Barnabas split over John Mark, Barnabas came alongside and said, God's not done with you yet. And God still had great things in store for him. So coming alongside those and continuing to walk with them and mentor them. I think I've got a picture here of our house in Japan. Maybe. So our house used to be the headquarters of a mission organization. So it looks a little different. It's probably the only house I've ever seen in Japan that has a cross on the front of it. This is our house, not the church. And then on the back side of it, it has this sign that says Christian House Entrance. Because of this, now, I don't know about your context. In churches I've worked with in the States, it's not uncommon to have people come up, knocking on the door of the church, asking for help, calling on the phone, asking, will you pay this bill for me, things like that. But that's not the case in Japan because people just don't know. They don't know that compassion is supposed to be part of what the church is all about. But one man had been to church as a kid, been to Sunday school when he was young. And as an elderly man, he was struggling, and he showed up at our door because our house looks like this. He knew this is a sign of compassion. I can go here and find some help. And then finally, our friend Yodai, who he became a Christian in college after he received a Gideon Bible when he was in the States. But back in Japan, he's a minor league baseball player, and he kind of hit rock bottom. He got injured, and then COVID happened, and he ended up as an Uber Eats driver on his bike, delivering food in Japan. But he heard somebody speaking English and was curious about it. Long story short, through the interaction with our church, he really renewed his faith. He became involved translating. You can see maybe on the next one there. And being heavily involved, he's involved with our construction project on the first floor, renovation and things like that. And his grandmother, this is a great story. His grandmother said, "I'm sure glad you met those church people, because now you've stopped drinking up all my whiskey." So that was his grandmother's response. And the Lord transformed his life. Again, for a second time, God's grace was at work in his life, and he was changed there. All right, I know I'm going way too long here. Let me get back to two things here. One is, our team decided that there are lots of people who come to us, as I mentioned, wanting to work on their English, asking, "Do you teach English lessons?" And our team decided early on that we're going to say no, but I would love to study the Bible with you in English. Taking that felt need and addressing it, but again going deeper and saying there's actually something more important than that, and we want to help you with that, and inviting people to study the Bible with you. And as Jerry mentioned earlier, this is what I Am is all about. Ultimately, we share Jesus with them. The way to show compassion is to share Jesus with them. Jesus talked about how people will know that we're Christians not by the clothes that we wear or, our hairstyle or whatever it is, but by the love that we have for one another. Showing love, first of all, inside, but also letting that love spill over to the outside. I'm going to give you just a challenge, something to think about, and maybe we can discuss this at some point today. How do people in your community know that your church cares? How do they know that your church loves them? And it may be that if you're convicted about that, then maybe think of the other side of that. How could they know? How would it look if they knew that your church loved them and cared about the people in your community? I'm going to ask Ashley to come. I want to just invite you. Again, we've talked about this in a number of settings, but if the Lord lays it on your heart to be a part of what God is doing in Japan at Hope Alive, we invite you to do that as well. But also, again, to challenge you to think about your community. The same needs that are there in Japan are here in your community as well, and there are opportunities for us to reach those.
So as we're traveling and visiting churches, we're asking individuals or couples or families or churches as a whole to consider giving up eating out one night a month and using that money to partner with us so that children can hear about Jesus, so that moms who are struggling with depression can find hope in Jesus, so that businessmen who work outrageous hours and feel worthless if they make one mistake can hear that they're priceless, and so that those who are contemplating suicide can hear that they're seen, valued, and so loved by God.
I think Don's going to come and share in just a minute. That's a way that you can be involved through your giving, through your prayer, in what God is doing in Japan. But there are also opportunities for you to get hands-on with that, and we'll allow Don to share.
That's one of the things that we really strive to do with Go Global. Not only, we don't want to just pour a bunch of information out to you. We want you to self-reflect and think about where is my place in God's kingdom. And if we look at Scripture, we know in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, it pretty much lays it out for us that in Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. A lot of times what we'd like to do is put in or, right, instead of and. And what that truly means is that we are, as Christian believers, because we received the gospel of Jesus Christ, we are responsible for our Jerusalem, for our Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. That we as believers, as we are going, that's what the Great Commission tells us to do, as we are going, we are to share and disciple people to Jesus Christ. So how can I do that? And Jack and Ashley have really shared quite intensely. It's every time I hear about Japan and the struggles that are happening there, my heart stops occasionally. One of our Japanese missionaries even talked about a forest. It's called the suicide forest, where they go and they commit suicide. But this is just one area. You turn on the news, you see the things that are happening in Ukraine. Hasn't been that far removed. We saw where Afghanistan, where people were scattering, trying to get away from their government. And that's the thing. Around the world, there are people who are being abandoned by their God. They're being abandoned by their government. They're being abandoned by all the things that they thought were going to put them in a better place. And I think that's where we help the most, and where we can help the most, because we see that God, throughout history, has scattered people, He's gathered people, and He sent people, all for the glory of His name. And I truly believe that all this scattering that's been taking place in Ukraine and in Afghanistan, God's going to make a way where those people may hear the gospel of Jesus Christ and come to the saving knowledge of who He is and what He's done. So what do you do in all that? What can you do in all that? The Hannah Project is it's a NGO that's part of, it's a separate entity. We organized a separate entity basically so we could go into countries and be somewhat undetected. If you go into a country under the name of I Am Inc., the first thing that they will do in countries in the 1040 window and others is they're going to do a scan to see who you work for. You work for I Am, that means you're not going to get into these countries. So we created this NGO where we can go and work in countries and under a national organization, a governmental organization to share humanitarian aid. And what that also does is provides us opportunities to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. So what can you do? You can be a part of that. We want people within our denomination and others, we have even people that are outside of our denomination, to come and go with us in short-term mission trips. And you are probably already in your mind, you're saying, I don't possess that ability, whatever that is. But I promise you, there is a place for you at in THP. There's a place for me, and that's even the motto, there's a place for me in THP. So I would like a challenge to you today is I would like to challenge you to consider signing up for a THP short-term mission trip and go and share the compassion, minister to people who are in need, and share the gifts that you may hold. Jerry's going to come and share. A break? Okay. Jerry's not going to come right now. We're going to take a break right now. And so let's take 10 or 15 minutes. We'll call you back whenever we're ready. All right?
We have refreshments.
Refreshments, even better. I think what you could do